I'm speaking to you from a small town in California today called Ojai, spelled Ojai. And my wife, Katie, and we've been together now for 40 years. We just had our 40th anniversary of meeting each other in January of this year. And we've co-authored about a dozen books together over the years, in addition to teaching together and working together all of our time. She's also a psychologist, and so was in private practice when I first met her, and then we combined our essences and began to work and write books together in 1980. So I wanted to weave a couple of themes together. Katie and I are probably best known, thanks to Oprah and other shows like that 30 years ago, for our book, Conscious Loving, which is widely used as a relationship manual. And many of you are also have also probably seen or read or had some of the ideas from my book on personal transformation, The Big Leap. And I want to weave in a couple of things from both of those because I think they have great relevance to the time we're going through now. So before I get into those ideas, let's just take a moment to presence ourselves in the moment that we're in, this sacred moment of space that we have together to talk about the most essential things of life. In 1977, I sat down on a cushion on the floor of my apartment in Colorado at the time, where I was a university professor, and I realized that I didn't have a purpose for my life. I'd never figured out what my life purpose was. And I sat down and I spent about an hour feeling my way into it. And when I got up, I realized that what I had for a purpose of my life, what I most wanted, was that every day I could expand in love, in creativity, and abundance in my life while I was inspiring other people to do the same. If I could be doing that, I was in heaven. At the time, I was a university professor, and I only got to do that a teeny little bit of the time because endless meetings, and we had to teach certain courses that were all specified by the state and that kind of thing. And so there wasn't a lot of freedom. I mean, it was a great job in a way because nobody really told you what to do or bossed you around, but it was cramping for me because it didn't address what I saw as the main problems of life, which have to do with relationship and self-esteem and how to make changes in our life in a graceful way. This time we're in at the present puts us all up against some of our biggest issues in life. One thing it has to do with is how do you deal with fear? Because there are many different layers of fear that would go on in any normal person in a situation where there are virulent illnesses in the air and also protests in the street, and whichever side of all of that you're on really is not terribly important because we all have the same emotions down in there. And one person may be angry about one thing and another person might be angry about another, but they both get the back of their neck tense when they're angry. Just like one person might be sad about something and another person sad about something else, but they still feel it in the same general location of their chest or their heart. It's important at this time because we're being called upon to make changes on a personal level and on a relationship level and on the collective at the same time. And while that has a lot of fear and anxiety and stirred up feelings in it, it's also a very perfect time to really put ourselves up against learning new things that will assist us in moving through the stuck places in ourselves so we can contribute more positively to the world. I believe that we're in a big change in evolution right now, and I want to put it in very clear body terms. If you look at any body, a cat or a dog or a human, whatever it is, or a opossum, or up and down the phylogenetic chain, you'll see that we have something in common that's gone back for hundreds and thousands, millions of years. And that is when we get under stress, we contract. So if you poke a worm, it'll contract toward the middle. If you scare a cat, its muscles will contract and it'll run or fight back. We're all wired up in that one fundamental way in which when the pressure is on, we tend to contract toward the center. And in our case, as human beings, we have musculature, for example, that gets tight when we get angry. It happens to be located up and down the spine, up and down the shoulders, around the back of our necks. And if you look at scientific studies of what happens when a person gets angry or scared or sad, things tighten up in different places. When we get scared, our bellies tighten up and pull back toward the center. So we have wired into us from way back the tendency to contract when we're scared. My thinking is that we are in a state right now, in a stage right now, where we're also now learning something new, which is to expand when we get scared. Evolution will have us contracting, but at the same time, we can learn something new, which is to expand and be open and become more spacious in times of stress rather than the default programming of contracting toward the center of ourselves. So someday, if you come to the Hendricks Institute and take one of our seminars, you'll get a wristband, and on the wristband, it's when you graduate, and it says, breathe, move, love. And it's a simple way of reminding you what to do to get unstuck anytime you feel stuck. The first thing you want to do is just take a few big, easy breaths. Science tells us that all you need is 3 deep, easy breaths to begin to change your stress chemistry in your blood. So right now with me, just take 3 easy breaths that last 10-second round trip, 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. So count it out with me. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. Now, as I said, when you take 3 big, easy breaths, your body's stress chemistry begins to change. So already different cells are dancing in your body that were not dancing before. On the wristband, it says breathe, move, love. And the move means anytime you get stuck, the first thing you want to do is take a few breaths and change your body position a little. Stand up if you've been sitting down, sit down if you've been standing up, shrug your shoulders if you've been whatever you're doing, and just move somehow, because life is movement. And there's a tendency to contract and get frozen when we get scared or angry or in a rut of some sort. So breathe, move, love. What we mean by love is always to love as much as you can from wherever you are. That instruction has saved many people, including myself, a great deal of misery in our lives, because sometimes the only thing you can do is simply love as much as you can from wherever you are. And maybe you're in a place where you're feeling unloved or unlovable. But love happens to be the one thing that it can expand and embrace its opposite. So I've seen it 1,000 times in my office where a person will come up against something that they've never been able to accept or love in themselves. And suddenly, in a moment of invitation that I might give them, they have a moment of, oh, I can love that too. Or, oh, I can accept that about myself. I never tire of that moment, that look on a person's face when they move from not accepting or loving something about themselves to that, oh, I can love that just as it is. It's a magic moment. And I want to insert a personal story here, if I may. about where I learned that, because now I've written books about it and everything like that, but there was a time when I didn't know that particular transformational tool. In 1974, I was in Colorado Springs, Colorado, in the mountains out nearby, and I was just about to start being a lowly assistant professor at the University of Colorado in the counseling psychology department. And like all freshly minted PhDs, I thought I knew everything about everything. I knew how to cure every particular psychological problem there was. But in a way, I didn't really know anything. And that caused a little bit of a crisis in me. The only person I'd really gone through a deep experience of transformation with was myself. And I learned an immense amount of things from that. But then when I got into graduate school, I sort of had to learn all the tools of counseling. Just like I'd gone into engineering, they'd give me all the tools of engineering. And so I had to learn all of the known tools of counseling psychology, but we weren't really encouraged to innovate and try on new things. So that wasn't the kind of training program it was. Just like in medical school, they don't take you into the operating room and say, well, okay, see if you can make up a new way to get this appendicitis or appendix out. So Stanford PhD program definitely was not like that. And so it was about learning some tried and true things that always work for everybody, except, of course, being human beings when they didn't work. And so I got to this place where I was just about to take my first professoring job. And I had this little crisis there. I was standing out in the woods and I realized, wait a minute, I don't really know exactly how human beings get stuck and how we get unstuck. And I had this insight. I realized, you know, I'd always gone to books or to experts, professors, for those answers. And they've been great answers, and I'd learned a tremendous amount out of books and from the professors, but there's no substitute for, learning how to ride a bicycle yourself. And so in this moment, I realized I've been looking for the answers out there. What if I asked myself and then gave myself room to answer? And so I did that. I asked myself, and I guess the universe was the only person around me, and I asked myself, what is the one thing that human beings do that gets us stuck? And what is the one thing we need to do to liberate ourselves at any moment in a relationship or wherever we happen to be? And after I asked that, I just kind of stood there for a moment, open. And I think I was expecting some kind of answer in my mind, but what happened was completely unexpected. Instead of an intellectual answer, I got this tremendous rush of energy through me that seemed to come from the ground up. And I call it a benign freight train of positive energy that went through me. And as I stood there, I realized that my question had been answered because it left behind a piece of knowledge. And the piece of knowledge was this: what gets us stuck is resisting our experience, whatever it is. If you're sad, you'll move through it pretty quickly unless you seal it off and don't let yourself feel sad. Or if you're angry, if you acknowledge it and tell somebody, hey, I'm angry, it doesn't get stuck in your head. But headache clinics all over the world know that people come in all the time with headaches because their muscles get tight back here because they're angry and they don't know how to express it. And the same thing goes with fear. In the belly section of the body, where most people report their fear comes from in the form of butterflies or tight belly, many physical illnesses relate to that area of the body, and internists treat those illnesses in a variety of ways. But I know my doctor that I go to is a very holistic doctor, and he'll ask me if my stomach aches or something, what have I been stressed out about? He's as likely to ask that as he is to prescribe a pill for it. So our bodies are programmed to light up in certain ways when we go through things. And I think one of the miseducation um, crises of our time is that we don't do a very good job of teaching the simplest things to human beings, like this thing I was learning out there standing in the woods, which was ask yourself a question, and the question you really want to know, and give yourself some time to kind of wonder into it. Because I got that rush of energy, and the energy left behind this key piece of information that flavored my work, has flavored my work now for the past 40 or 50 years. And it is to look for whatever you're resisting. What is the thing that we're resisting not looking at? Because in that, you will find often the very issue that needs to be attended to for you to move through whatever your transformation you're going through in a smooth way. For some people, they'll do just about anything to resist saying, I'm angry. Some people will do just about anything to resist saying, I'm scared. I've actually seen CEOs of major corporations break down in tears in here because they couldn't get a certain thing out of their mouth. They couldn't get themselves to say, I'm scared, or I'm sad, or I'm angry. They had kind of a sealer on the expression of their emotions. So in that moment, I learned that what we need to do to free ourselves is to look for whatever we've been resisting and allow ourselves to feel that so that we can become whole again. So part of it involves learning how to let yourself be who you already are instead of sealing off who we already are. The first summer I met Katie, I wrote a little book called Learning to Love Yourself about that experience. And which is still in print today, here many years later. And I had to document that though, because I really wanted to let people know they always had a simple tool for moving through personal transformations, which is also simply just to let yourself accept and feel whatever's real and learn to express it in whatever way you possibly can in a straightforward way. Here we teach people how to communicate emotions in the same tone of voice as you might say the time of day. You can say, I'm scared about that. You don't need to say, I'm scared about that. It's just a matter of acknowledging whatever's there. A second thing that's incredibly important is not only that we resist certain things in ourselves, but of course we resist certain things in other people. So something happens with another person early on in our lives. Let's say we have an abandonment or some severe cutoff of a flow of positive energy. And in that moment, we develop a kind of a push away response to other people, so that when a person comes into our life that resembles something from the past, it triggers us in a way that causes things to stir up in our bodies. So I began to really study this very carefully in myself as well as other people. The day after I had that realization in Green Mountain Falls, Colorado, where I felt like for the first time I was able to feel what was going on inside myself. So right after that happened, I took my own advice. I just stood there and let myself feel everything I'd been resisting all my life. I could feel that there were things I was angry about my father's death, and things I was sad about, same kinds of things, and things I was scared about, but I'd never until that moment really given myself permission to feel those things. And I don't know how long it took me, but I just remember kind of wandering around the woods there, just kind of letting myself feel whatever was there. And then I had another realization too, that the one thing I'd never done is love myself as I loved other people. You know, my daughter at the time she would be 7 years old at the time. And so I realized that in my relationship with her, you know, it was a very sacred kind of relationship because I loved her. She was my only child, and I loved her. And I would do anything for her, and still, of course, would. And so what kept me from letting myself feel that was that I had some old wounds in the area of love myself. And so I began to explore those, and that took me on a little bit different journey that I want to tell you about in a moment that illustrates another healing principle. But for now, let me just say for the moment of what's going on now, and for in general in our lives, there's nothing better than you can do than learn to let yourself feel whatever is there, your own personal feelings, the feelings from the collective consciousness, to let yourself experience those fully and to love yourself fully for feeling those. That's the essence of personal transformation. There are lots of other fancy techniques, I'm sure, that you can find in the world, millions of them, but when it comes right down to it, it's about being able to love something that you haven't been able to love before. So I want to extend into something in the area of relationship in a moment, but I want to take a pause here to have a sip of my iced coffee and take questions or any observations from the guys.
Can you hear me? Can you hear us, Gay?
Yes.
Yeah, one thing that came up for me is yeah, it's just such an important lesson because of the way we look at our body as like, we even talk about it sometimes in terms of I have a body, and it's so there's such a different relationship to it when we come at it from I am a body and really open
Yes.
to the wisdom that it can bring us. Um, yeah, I mean, one reflection or question that I had is, um, how does that look like for you as a practice? The loving yourself and the body consciousness. Is there you know, to me personally, they feel like they're very connected, and I'm wondering if there's any practice that aligns the two, um, that would be of value to explore.
Sure. One that I could do right now, you mean?
Right now, or even letting us know where we could find it, or
Oh,
access
well,
it, or perhaps even describing it, and we can try it in our own time. Whatever works.
yes. As a matter of fact, my wife and I have Hendricks.com, and we have our Foundation for Conscious Living. Um, and so on the Foundation for Conscious Living website is a whole section called Restoring Resourcefulness. And it's all about how to reconnect with your body. It has a whole section on how to breathe and how to feel your different emotions, how to how to use your movement. So there's a whole powerful section on that at the Foundation for Conscious Living, our nonprofit foundation. And if you go to Hendricks.com, you can also find your way over to the foundation too. But I wanted to let you know that there are a tremendous number of resources for doing that. Also, each of the books that I've mentioned has resources in there, exercises and that kind of thing. And I want to actually, before we finish our conversation, I want to actually do a couple of processes that come out of the book. So some real-time live processes here on our conversation.
Yeah, we just got a question come in by someone saying, you know, what about being afraid or scared about things outside of your control. Like if you look around the world today and you see what's going on there, and there's a lot of darkness or unconsciousness in the world around us. And for some people, it might feel terrifying to be exposed to that. And however much self-work they do, or self-development work, or getting in touch with their body, they still kind of feel a threat from outside. And how would you work with that?
That's a very telepathic question, because the very next thing I wanted to talk about is this very issue about there are some things that are outside of our control and some things that are within our control. As a matter of fact, humankind's first self-help book was written about 2,000 years ago by students of a gentleman named Epictetus. And you can read all sorts of good stuff about Epictetus, but he was one of the great philosophers of his time. And his students collected some of his sayings and put them into a little book. And I treasure, there are many versions of that little book. It's called the Enchiridion. The best translation is in English is called The Art of Living by Sharon Labelle. It's the best translation I've found. But let me tell you what the first line of Epictetus's book says. The secret of happiness is knowing that there are some things within your power to control and some things that are not within your power to control. If that sounds familiar, it's repeated millions of times daily, that idea, by 12-step program participants. In the Serenity Prayer, it comes straight out of Epictetus. I forget the wording of it, but God grant us the wisdom to see, well, you know the one I'm talking about, but it's that very idea to find the difference between the things I can control and the things I cannot control. Learning to do that is of incredible importance, especially at a time like this, because now we have a tremendous number of things going on in the outside world that we're directly wired into it. And so it's naturally going to stir up different kinds of feelings of grief and anger and sorrow and fear, powerlessness oftentimes. And what we must do with that to preserve our own ability to contribute is to distinguish between those things that we can control and those things that we cannot control. The problem that many of us have is we put a tremendous amount of attention into thinking about things that we can't control, like the past, for example. We don't have any control over it. It already happened. Yet so many people use up our mental calories every day thinking about stuff that happened before and trying to figure it out or change it or something. So, but a lot of energy goes into the past unnecessarily because it's unchangeable. The second thing that people put a lot of energy into is to worrying about the future. Worry is a mental symptom of not being present in your body. If you're worrying, that means you're not feeling something down in here. And it could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be fear. But worry is a symptom of resisting your inner feelings. So worry is often about the future, and 98% of it is useless because we're worrying about something that's completely uncontrollable. So we might, for example, sit here and get all worked up about what some friend of ours thinks of us. But when you think about it, we have absolutely no control over what other people think. In those moments, we need to learn to take action. And the action might be calling that friend and say, hey, what do you think of me? That would be a direct action in service of that. But worrying about it accomplishes absolutely nothing. It just kind of creates ferment. And that great line that John Lennon had many years ago, life is what's happening while we're busy making other plans. You know, there's so much stuff that goes on in here that we miss out on the key moments oftentimes of life. And so I think to to get back to the specific question, that when you find yourself thinking about something, do a quick little analysis. Is this something I have any degree of control over or not? And if not, get off it as soon as possible. Drop it like a hot potato, because it's doing absolutely nothing in terms of creating a positive response to whatever the situation is.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by this question as well, and thank you to whoever asked this question. I feel, yeah, it feels somewhat in short, it's easier said than done, I guess. And I can't remember who it was that I was having a conversation with the other day, and they shared with me that one of the greatest addictions that no one really talks about is the addiction to thinking, and how when there are things that are so large that are outside of our control, they can at times almost become, for myself anyway, and it could just start on a small level, small detail of it, thinking about it, but if I give it the energy, then it turns into that worry. Yeah. There's another question that's come through, Gay. And the question is that there are monks, lamas, and spiritual leaders that I would, this is quote, there are monks, lamas, spiritual leaders that I would risk to say epigenetic scientists, etc., who have been mastering the power of mind and its relationship to the body, and are still not able to heal themselves of different diseases. What would your thoughts be? What would your thoughts be on this?
One of the quotations I have here that I use a lot comes from one of the apocryphal Gospels called the Gospel of Thomas. And it says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you. And what that means in terms of practical awareness is that all of us have things inside ourselves that we need to bring forth. In the Big Leap, I call it your genius, your natural genius. So we all have these creative impulses that we need to bring forth. And if we bring them forth, life works magnificently well. If we don't bring those things forth, we start feeling stifled and stagnant. And especially as we get older, Katie and I say in our seminars that every breath you take after 40 is a choice between creativity or stagnation. Creativity or stagnation. And so many people just kind of go down into that stagnation and don't ever come out of it after midlife. But we want to inspire people as best we can to keep that spirit of creative flow alive in ourselves. If we do that, if we can nurture that creative spark in here, it satisfies something that really can't be satisfied any other way. I think each of us have a reason for being here and a message to deliver and something our lives need to be about. And nobody's going to give that to you. You have to kind of find out what that is for yourself. And I think, well, there's a great quotation too that I also use from Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher of a few hundred years ago. He said, all of humankind's problems come from the inability to sit quietly in a room by ourselves for 10 minutes doing nothing. And so there's a lot of wisdom in that, because it's very seldom that we sit and just kind of open up to our own inner wisdom. You know, we go outside for our wisdom rather than just kind of sitting with ourselves each day. I've had the great gift of 48 years ago, I learned to meditate when I was a graduate student, actually. And I have been a daily meditator ever since now. So I have a 48-year meditation streak going. And so every morning, you can't see this chair behind me, but every morning you'll find me here at about 5 a.m. doing my morning meditation. And then again in the afternoon, we'll usually meditate together also. And so I'm a big believer in kind of learning to kind of sit with ourselves and feel ourselves and tune in. Like one of my yoga teachers once said, she had a bunch of kids, and she said, if I can give myself 1 hour a day, I can give back 23 to other people. But if I don't give myself that hour a day, I can't give anything to anybody because I don't have any juice for myself. And so I think we need to honor the fact that life is a kind of a two-step process of going deeply inside ourselves and then coming out and expressing ourselves fully. That it's important to take that in breath of, who am I? What am I here for? What do I most want to express here while I'm on this planetary trip of mine? On the average, we have about 25,000 days allotted to us at this stage of the game in evolution. How am I using my 25,000 days? And so it's important to open up to that, what I call the inward stroke, going down inside, the in-breath. But it's equally important to take the out-breath to say, what do I want to express out here in the world? What part of my genius do I want to bring out into the world? Is it learning to write a symphony, or is it learning to make a good soup, or is it learning to homeschool my kids, or what is my genius? There's only one good way to find that out, and it's to sit down and tune into it and ask yourself. And that's exactly, I want to now segue a little bit into some of the material that I learned that's in the Big Leap. Not long after I had that insight in Colorado Springs, I realized that the one area that I'd never really done any conscious work about was the area of relationships. And at the time I was closing in on, maybe I was around 30 years old, 29, 30 years old. And I'd had a bunch of different kinds of relationships in my teens and 20s, one woman after the other that would all seem to last about 6 months or so, and then the relationship would fall apart. They'd always start with great acclaim, but I always said they had the trajectory of the Titanic. They would start with great fanfare and then hit an iceberg after 6 months or so. But it took me years to figure out that the iceberg was here, that there was a part of myself that I kept coming up against. And I began to inquire into that. And as I did, a whole world opened up to me, the world of relationship. And I began to find different aspects of relationship, like, just basic things like, how do you get along with another person? What are the actual technical skills of it? And I'd never really learned those things in my master's or my PhD program. Maybe now you do, but in those days, there wasn't much known about relationship dynamics like we do today. There was no Oprah and 1,500 different self-help books and that kind of thing. And in fact, there were no self-help books. They didn't exist when I started thinking about this. And so I got very curious about finding out what are the issues in relationship. And I started looking at my own relationships. And I realized that my own relationships had three big problems in them. One was either me or the other person, or both of us, weren't good at telling the truth to each other, to telling the truth about simple things like, I was angry about that, or I was sad about that, or I felt hurt about that. We just weren't good I wasn't good at it, and oftentimes the person in my life wasn't very good at it either. So we would stuff those things and then have blow-ups that we'd get into arguments with each other. The second thing I saw that I did in my relationships was I got into blame, and the other person would get into blame. So we would blame each other for things, blame and criticism. And I could see how my early family life, it was a very critical environment, and I could see where I learned how to be critical, but I couldn't figure out what the other thing was. What did you do if you weren't criticizing the other person? So that was number two. The third thing I realized that I would often get into relationships with someone who wasn't interested in the creative life. And what that would do would be it would cause me to either pull back on my own creative life, or it would cause me to criticize the other person for not having much of a creative life, because I'm a writer, have been for ages, and whoever I'm in relationship with, I go in a room for 2 or 3 hours, and I sit there and I do my writing, and I come out, and if the person isn't okay with that, well, heck, that's not very good at all, because then we get into conflicts about that. So I began to look at that in all my relationships, and on one magical day in 1979, I had a breakthrough in the middle of an argument with my then partner, Carol. And in the middle of this argument, I had an insight that it wasn't our 500th argument in our 5 years of on and off relationship. It was our 500th version of the same argument. And suddenly all of that coalesced, and I realized that we kept repeating the same argument, the same three things. One of us would lie about something or just not tell the truth about it, or we'd get into blaming each other, or we'd get into hassles about how much time I was spending at work and stuff like that and on my writing projects. And so this blinding insight came to me in the middle of the argument, and I said to her, "Hey, I just figured out something. All of our problems would dissolve if we just told the truth to each other and took responsibility for what came up instead of blaming, and both made a real commitment to our creative lives. So we didn't even have to think about that again anymore." And so, to make a long story short, she didn't turn out to be interested in that. So we ended up breaking up. But that stayed in my mind, and I made a little vow that I was going to stay single until I located somebody in the world that understood what I was talking about those three things. So roll the clock forward 1 month to a room in Menlo Park, California in 1980, when I walked into a room of about 50 or 60 people and saw Katie across the room for the first time. And I was kind of smitten by what she looked like. She was extremely attractive on a physical level, but also she kind of almost seemed to shimmer with some kind of aliveness that I'd never seen before. And so I made this note: I got to go talk to that woman sometime tonight. Well, again, to compress a long story, she came across to say something to me part way through the evening. And so she'd obviously had some kind of spark too. And so I wanted to ask her out for a cup of coffee, but I said to her, "I'd love to ask you out for coffee, but I really need to tell you this thing that just happened last month. I had this big download, and I realized that I'm only interested in relationships where both people are honest, tell the truth, both people take responsibility instead of blaming, and both people are committed to their creative life. So on that basis, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me?" And she was about 15 seconds, and finally she said, "How about lunch?" And so that was the beginning of our relationship, which has blossomed through 10 or 12 co-authored books together, and many trips to Chicago to be on Oprah and other shows, and 30-some trips around the world teaching our relationship work. And so those are the three things that have most impact in the area of relationship. So when you're going through any kind of relationship trauma, find out what truths aren't being spoken, and find out, where am I not taking responsibility? Where am I still living in blame? And particularly ask yourself, how am I doing with my creative passions? Because fact is that if we're not following out our creative passions, we take it out on the relationships around ourselves. And through getting into addictions or being overly critical, but a lot of our relationship unhappiness comes out of our own unhappiness with our own creative fulfillment. So breathe with that for a little minute, and a minute or two, and let's take a few questions and observations about that in the area of relationship.
There you go, unmute.
Can you hear me okay, Gay?
Now I can, yes.
Sorry about that. We just had a little bit of an issue with some people breaking into the chat room.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazies out there.
Yeah.
A lot of miserable people. So let's take a moment to love that same part of ourselves that could be that desperate and hurt and lonely and in pain to do something like that.
Yeah. What a question that came up for me regarding relationships is in this particular time where it can be quite challenging to really commit to something because there is so much uncertainty in the world. How can those critical relationships in our life help us to find a way forward?
The quality of your life depends on the quality of your relationships. There's no other way around it.
Mm-hmm.
We need to give tremendous amount of attention to relationship matters, because those are the things that cause us most consternation inside. I've been at the deathbeds of elders, and I can tell you from being around people in the closing days or moments of their life, now that I'm an elder myself, I've learned that at the end of their lives, people aren't saying, gosh, I wish I'd spent more time with the office, or I wish I'd written more books or anything like that. They're thinking about the quality of the relationships in their lives and where their heart is open and where their hearts are closed. And so we need to honor that human beings are incredibly relationship oriented creatures. But we also need to understand one other thing. Relationships are a pulsation of unity and individuation. Unity and individuation. In other words, part of the pulsation of relationship is getting close to another person, but part of the pulsation also is getting some space, having time to individuate. So sometimes we've worked with, I think, 4,500 couples now. Sometimes we get couples that have literally never spent an hour apart, and so there's all the union phase, but none of the individuation phase. So that can be toxic after a while. And you can be in toxic individuation too, where you're scared of union. So we need to look at, what is my resistance to getting really close, and what is my resistance to being fully individuated? Because in order for relationships to work, you need to have both of those pulsations embodied in yourself. So it's okay for your partner to leave the room without you going, I'm being abandoned.
And given what's happened, how has it been for you and your relationship? Given has there been? I'm curious. Has there been anything, any new insights with regards to where things are now in lockdown and how that individuation works in lockdown?
No, not really. I think that physical distance doesn't mean anything. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you can be individuating while the person is sitting across the room from you. So you don't have to be in a cave in Tibet in order to individuate. Um, well, you know, we've been together so long now that, you know, we haven't even spoken a critical word to each other in 20 years. We've been in this house 20 years and nobody's ever said a cross word to anybody else while we're in this house. And so it's a good way for me to remember. But you know, in the first years of our relationship, before we got everything worked out, all the stuff that's in conscious loving, before we learned all that, yeah, we used to fight and everything, but now it doesn't happen anymore. We've been a great team for a long time and just kind of travel the world together and see it the same way. And so I think that I know lots of other people that have had relationship issues during this period of lockdown and that kind of thing, because they often need some physical distance in order to individuate. And so I've counseled a lot of couples on Zoom and on the phone to take a little space and have a walk around the block and that kind of thing. Even though it's a small thing, it often helps.
It's almost it feels as though for that when you do have that physical distance and that individuation happens naturally, whereas you need to be more conscious of it in order for it to happen when you're there in the physical. Gay, we're approaching an hour now, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to talk about your new book.
Oh, sure. Let me say a few words about that. I will hold it up. It's called Conscious Luck. It's 8 Secrets for Intentionally Changing Your Fortune. And it's kind of the sequel to The Big Leap. So if you've read The Big Leap or working your way through The Big Leap, this will kind of take another step for you, because what it's really all about is changing some of your core intentions and changing some of your core beliefs about how lucky you can be. And our big discovery that we share in the book is there's a lot of research on things that make you luckier, but almost nobody knows about it. And I've discovered some things. I share 4 big things in the book, but also my writing partner, Carol, she contributed a number of other things that she did research on and everything. So the first half of the book is everything I know about how to get luckier. And the second half of the book are exercises and processes you can use to get luckier. But the first thing I want you to do right now, if you're willing, is just do a quick little 10-second process with me. And that is to say a sentence, just try the sentence on, I'm willing to be luckier every day of my life. I'm willing to be luckier every day of my life. Try it on. Find out if indeed you would be willing to have your life about a process of getting luckier and luckier and luckier. And then I show you in the book 8 different things that you can do to speed it up. But if you think about it, all personal change, all big personal transformation begins with willingness and commitment. That's why in Conscious Luck, the whole first chapter is about how to commit, how to make a commitment to being luckier. And we have there are some things you should do. Take 10 or 15 minutes and work through the processes there. But let me just show you what I'm talking about. Try on another sentence that says, I commit to being luckier every day of my life. I commit to being luckier every day of my life. it's one step up from willingness. Willingness is to say, okay, I'm willing, but commit means that's really what I want to do. I'd really like to do that. I'm willing to make my life be about that. I highly recommend it because, as I tell all of my people who are here who come to take seminars and everything, I say it's a lot easier to be lucky than it is to be good. And because I want you to be good at what you do, but I also want you to be open to receiving the grace of the universe. I want you to be willing to take that full in-breath that brings in abundance, that brings in luck, that brings in love, to be willing to open yourself fully to what you can possibly receive. So that's a dimension that I think people are unskilled at, and I want to help people wherever you are in the world to open up and become more and more and more willing to receive. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I hope our paths cross again. If you get up to the little village of Ojai, California, be sure and let us know.
Thanks, Gay. And if people wanted to look more into your work, the place to go would be the Hendricks Institute.
Yes, the Hendricks Institute, hendricks.com. Also, I wanted to let you know.
For conscious living is the other one.
I also want you to, either one of those would be fine. And we have our own website for Conscious Luck. It's called consciousluck.com. And one reason to go there are a couple of guided meditations you can download and a self-assessment tool that you can download. Also, people that have read the book can also get a $100 discount on our creativity camp that we offer in the summertime that starts on June 24th. And creativity camp used to be something that you came here to Ojai and did, and it cost several $1,000s and that kind of thing. Now we've gone virtual with it. We've put it on, we're going to do it on Zoom, and for only $395. But as I say, you could buy the book and get a $100 discount. So if you're interested in creativity camp, by all means, go to consciousluck.com and get your book, because you can save a few dollars.
That sounds great. Thanks, Gay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Many blessings to you.
Yeah, blessings to you too. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.